Alright, so as all of you know, Roland Garros starts tomorrow, and we have had a draw for a couple of days now, and obviously a lot of buzz around this year's tournament, with it considered more open than it has been in past years, with, for the first time in my life, actually, as a tennis fan, no Rafa Nadal, no King of Clay at Roland Garros. But for the second year running, we have a draw that is pretty top-heavy. Not as much so as it was a year ago, but definitely still the top half. At least given context, form, is the stronger of the two this year. Noticeably so. So, without further ado, let's get into my predictions. Let's get into that top half with the top quarter, with Carlos Alcaraz's quarter. On the surface, I think that of the top four seeds here, Carlos does have the toughest road to the semifinals in that final weekend. As far as big names are concerned, he could see Denis Shapovalov in the third round, and then potentially Cam Norrie or Lorenzo Musetti, both guys who have beaten Alcaraz in the past, even on clay. And then, of course, being placed in the same quarter as Stefanos Tsitsipas, who, albeit not as strong a clay court season as his past couple, but he can obviously play on the dirt and has some strong pedigree at this tournament as well. But just starting with Carlos and his prospects, obviously the most recent thing we saw from him was that early loss in his opening match in Rome, where he crashed out to Fabian Marozsan. Pretty poor showing from Alcaraz in that one, and then his opponent on the other side of the net was absolutely redlining. So, the makings there for a monumental upset. But nonetheless, I consider that to be pretty inconsequential for his RG prospects here. For the second year running, he had the strongest build-up to the French Open. This year, I think, solidly the number one favorite for the tournament. And albeit, I think he has the toughest path for the top four seeds, I don't see much of a chance that Alcaraz crashes out early again, especially best of five. The names I mentioned, Shapovalov has been pretty bad for the most part this year, and especially on clay, I don't really see him being able to put a dent in Alcaraz as things stand right now. Of course, with how much he blows hot and cold, you never know, but it's been a while since we have seen Denis's best, so I don't really give him much of a shot there. Fourth round, Norrie, of course, has the potential to make things ugly if Alcaraz is off, as he has before against Carlos. Still, best of five, I don't anticipate him being able to get across the finish line by just, winning ugly. I think Musetti, if he brings his game, is an interesting one. He's had a couple of matches here at RG with 2 sets to love up against Djokovic, fourth round in 2021. Last year, first round, up 2 sets on Stefanos Tsitsipas. And giant killer this year, beating Djokovic in Monte Carlo. And really having a solid clay court season since Monte Carlo. Clay is easily Musetti's best surface, and his biggest win was beating Alcaraz in the final of Hamburg last year. But, my rationale there is, Musetti could test him, and, he came reasonably close against Djokovic and Tsitsipas in the past, but, I think what I learned from those matches, too, is that his flashy game is going to be tough to just maintain the advantage over one of those tier 1 guys. So with all of those guys, I think Alcaraz could be tested for sure, but I don't really see that big a threat of him going out before the quarters, so I pencil him in there. I feel similarly about Stefanos Tsitsipas in the other portion of this quarter. His other potential seeds that he could face prior to the quarter would be Felix Auger-Aliassime, Sebastian Corda, and Bernabe Zapata Miralles. And I honestly think Zapata Miralles would be the most formidable of the three at the moment, just because Felix and Corda really have not been able to get that much rhythm going in a while, especially on clay. Both of them dealing with those physical issues. Corda, very recently coming back, having not played since the Australian Open when he injured his wrist when he made the quarters there. And while Sebastian Corda played really well in Australia and he's not half bad on clay. I think made the 4th round in 2020 and won a title on the surface in 2021. But I think he's just going to be too short on match play, and I can pretty much say the exact same thing for Felix. Felix, didn't even really get that much going at the beginning of the year when he was healthier. And yeah, he too, coming off injury, is short on match play and probably confidence at this point. And honestly, I think the biggest threat to Steph before the quarters would be a couple of those veteran clay court guys like Diego Schwartzman if he gets going. And, he has completely just gone off the rails this year, so it's hard to entertain that. And then guys like Zapata Miralles and Carballes Baena, I guess, could make Tsitsipas work, but I think he just has too much in the toolkit for them. That added on to him being an elite clay court player himself, so I go Steph Carlos in the quarters, and there, Carlos has really owned Steph in this matchup. Complete has been thrown around with Carlos plenty, over the course of the last 2 years. Most complete teenager we've seen, and, I would tend to agree with that. But in matches like this matchup, you really see it magnified, because I've talked about in the past the Tsitsipas and, others of his generation having a fatal flaw. And, in Steph's case, the backhand defense, and obviously the return on the backhand, it's been suspect. And so far, I've seen in this matchup, Alcaraz just use his superior all-around game to pretty much make Tsitsipas look powerless at times. And I don't see why that would change here, with Tsitsipas not playing particularly great at the moment. Of course, Steph has been recovering from that whole shoulder injury at the beginning of the season after Australia, so he's had to work his way back, and he's played better and better as the clay court season has gone. But he doesn't have his best stuff at the moment, and that's a nightmare matchup for him, so I'll give him a set and say Alcaraz in 4, and Carlitos to win this quarter. Getting to Novak Djokovic's quarter, in spite of Novak being bumped down to 3, I think he has a really nice path here. Of course, the other seeds in his quarter include ADF, Alejandro Davidovich Fokina, Roberto Bautista Agut, Ubi Hurkacz, Karen Khachanov, Dan Evans, Ben Shelton, and Andrei Rublev, the next highest seed, and Novak's projected quarterfinal opponent. So let's start with Djokovic. Obviously, this has been a bit of a different clay court season, I think, than even the past couple, where he started slow and had to build up to winning form at the tail end of clay court season, but that's never come this year. It's always been death, taxes, and Djokovic peaking in Rome, but even that didn't happen this year, really for the first time since 2010, and the dude has been ridiculously consistent at that event, so the fact that it didn't improve there was a little bit alarming. But even beyond that, more importantly, the elbow seems to have been a problem throughout the course of this clay court season. Novak's been rocking the elbow sleeve throughout, I believe, all 3 events that he played at some point during the clay court season. And on clay in particular, that's especially important because, the penetration on that forehand is hampered. And, on clay, I think that makes winning for him even more of an uphill battle, especially against the best of the best on the surface. The issues with, the forehand lacking a bit of venom post-elbow surgery were put under scrutiny in his matches against Nadal on clay, really, ever since he came back from elbow surgery mid-2018. And Novak seemed to take note of that, 2021, 2022, beginning of this year. Djokovic really did beef up the forehand when needed, and that was on clay in 21 and 22. But with him not really showing any of that this year, I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on, because it's so important for him on clay against the best on this surface, which obviously you still have to include him in himself, but particularly on this surface against certain opponents, he's going to need that elbow to cooperate. That being said, he should be very happy with his draw. I think pretty much everyone in his quarter, he can probably get away with his elbow not being 100%. Honestly, pre-quarterfinal, I think Alejandro Davidovich Fokina might be the only one that could give him a fight. ADF playing really good ball this year, and did beat, and, with a caveat, really rusty Djokovic in Monte Carlo last year. And even he, I would probably rate his chances as super slim against Novak. I do expect Rublev to be the one to meet Novak in the quarters. Andre has been pretty reliable in slams of late. He doesn't have the easiest opener with Laslo Djere, but I think that'll be one he can navigate. He'd probably meet Karen Khachanov. They've split both their matches on clay this year. Khachanov also a 2-time consecutive semifinalist in these last 2 slams, and also former quarterfinalist at RG. But Rublev, I think he'll keep his momentum going, albeit hasn't been the strongest since winning his biggest title of his career in Monte Carlo, but he has all the reason in the world to head into Roland Garros confident. Andre, a quarterfinalist himself last year, so I'll also say seeds hold here and say Djokovic plays Rublev. Rublev did beat a also rusty Djokovic in Belgrade in the final last year. I think only time he's beaten Novak, so I don't rate his chances all that high if they are to face off, regardless of who it is really. He's owned Rublev, he's owned Khachanov. I don't think either of those guys, unless Novak's, severely hampered or has a super off day, really stand a chance. Oh yeah, aside from ADF, I guess I neglected to mention who he could face otherwise, but Hubert been brutal on clay. RBA, guy who's given him trouble in the past but doesn't love clay and is showing his age. So, I'm pretty confident regardless of Djokovic's health, we'll see a much better version of him in Paris than all clay court season. He deserves that benefit of the doubt. It's as simple as that. The big 3 play basically a different sport in these majors, best of 5. And, urgency will be up. He's going to be aware. No Nadal. Great opportunity here to become the solo leader. Get that 23rd slam, potentially a triple career slam. So I'm almost certain he'll be better, so I go Djokovic over Rublev in the quarterfinal. Moving on to the third quarter, that's Casper Ruud's quarter. This quarter features Botic van de Zandschulp, Jan-Lennard Struff, Tommy Paul, Taylor Fritz, Francisco Cerundolo, Miomir Kecmanovic, and Holger Rune. Now, straight off the bat with Rune, who I mentioned last, I think he's a clear-cut favorite to get out of this quarter. Casper Ruud still is the number 4 seed, but looking a lot more flimsy coming into this year's French Open than he has the past couple. And on the other hand, Rune coming into this French Open absolutely surging throughout the clay court season, really his best stretch of the season by far. 2 Masters finals in Monte Carlo and Rome, as well as title in Munich. Holger's coming into this tournament among the top favorites. A year ago, he had his first big run at a major, going to the quarterfinals, upsetting Stefanos Tsitsipas along the way. And you would be hard-pressed to say that he doesn't at least match that result this year. Could potentially meet Francisco Cerundolo or Taylor Fritz in the 4th round, but again, while I could see both guys testing him, especially Cerundolo, who has really had a really nice clay court season this year, I can't really see either one beating him, especially as he'll probably still have fresh legs at that point in the tournament. I think same to be said about getting a potential second round with Sebastian Baez, which also is not the easiest second round, especially on clay, but still would be shocked to see an upset there. As for Casper Ruud, there are a couple stumbling blocks here for Casper. To me, it does feel like he's had a bit of a track record, although less so on clay, but a track record of struggling with the big hitters, big servers. Don't really have a stat on hand to prove it, but, he struggled with Botic van de Zandschulp. Jan-Lennard Struff overpowered him in Monte Carlo, and I think those struggles could be amplified given his lack of confidence. It's been a rough year for him so far. I think he did improve, in Rome and Geneva, made the semis of Rome, quarters of Geneva, running into a peaking Nico Yari. But still, Casper's yet to really have any wins this year that really move me too much. And because of that, I am leaning an upset here. To me, it's deciding between Nico Yari and Jan-Lennard Struff for this quarterfinal spot. And I'm going to go against my better judgment here, given Jari played the week before, winning the title in Geneva. But he's been so excellent on clay this year. I think he's capable of upsetting Tommy Paul, who's had a brutal clay court season so far this year. Surprisingly so to me, to be honest, but that feels like an upset waiting to happen. Between Struff and Jari, Struff could very well win that match, but I don't think Roland Garros, the court's going to help him as much as Madrid did. And then Ruud, obviously low on confidence. For either one of them, very tough road to get there, but I'm going to say Jari does it. Makes a deep push here in a major, makes the quarters, and loses at the hands of Holger Rune. Which now brings us to our final quarter, the bottommost quarter, the Daniil Medvedev Quarter. And talking about Medvedev, he's got an excellent draw here. I don't know, maybe Quinton Halli could maybe challenge him a bit in the second round, but other than that, I don't see Borna Coric beating this version of Medvedev. Coric has had a nice clay court season, has had some pretty decent results, and also I look at Thomas Martin Etcheverry as a dark horse among this 8th. But even for those two guys, who I think are the most formidable potential opponents for Medvedev before a quarterfinal, it's hard to see them putting much of a dent in him. And meanwhile, for his projected quarterfinal opponent, Jannik Sinner, low-key, Jannik doesn't have too many matches of late. He was injured or fatigued, I think, midway through Barcelona after a good run in Monte Carlo and Barcelona. But after that, couldn't play Madrid, only got 2 matches in at Rome. So I don't necessarily know if, the fabulous Sinner form we've had through most of the season to this point is going to be there at Roland Garros. That being said, I don't really see him losing to anyone before the 4th round. Before that, maybe Dimitrov on a good day can push him. And even at the 4th round, the only one I'm really looking at that could challenge him is if Alexander Zverev is able to find some better form. Zverev this year has shown glimpses of being able to return to somewhere near his best. I thought his stretch from Dubai through Monte Carlo was pretty encouraging, but since Monte Carlo, it's been pretty disastrous for him. No big win yet on the year. He's already a guy that, struggles in crunch time, and him being low on confidence right now really has done him no favors in that department. So the odds are definitely against him, I would say, and I would favor Jannik Sinner to beat him if they were to face off. But we'll have to wait and see. This guy does know his way around a clay court, but I'm probably going to need to see him beat someone of Sinner's caliber before I pick it. As for a potential Sinner versus Medvedev, I'm not all that sure of how that would fare, because this is as good an opportunity as Sinner has had to make his maiden semifinal appearance in a slam. Before this year, I probably would have picked Sinner against Medvedev on a clay court. But given what we've seen out of Medvedev this year, a lot of the times his matches on clay this year have shown pretty similar patterns to how he has looked on a hard court. With the new strings, the power deficiency isn't nearly as big a problem. And against Medvedev in general, Sinner's had a rough go of it against him. I believe 0-5 or 0-6 head-to-head. And, again, with Jannik's, and to this point, Jannik's finesse part of his game, net play, drop shots, still aren't up to the mark yet. I think given the track history and Medvedev's form, if it is for real, which I believe it is, he's probably going to have a very hard time getting through Medvedev, and that's something he struggled with throughout their head-to-head. I'd anticipate this one being tight, but I will roll with Daniil Medvedev. And that, of course, lines us up for a final weekend with semifinals of Alcaraz versus Djokovic and Medvedev versus Rune. Now, for Alcaraz versus Djokovic, this has obviously been a dream match that we've wanted to see again since they faced off for their only time at Madrid last year. That was a super tight match with Alcaraz getting the better of it, and since, for whatever reason, whether it was Alcaraz injuries or Djokovic unable to play certain events, these two really have not gotten the chance to be in the draw together much, let alone get a chance to play each other. But I think it's primed to happen here in the semis of Roland Garros. And this one I'm sure would be an absolute cracker of a match. As I said earlier, I expect Djokovic by the end of this tournament to be very hard to beat. I think it'll take a special performance. And I think Alcaraz is capable of delivering that special performance. Between them, the Alcaraz forehand is going to be the biggest shot on the court. And on the other hand, I am not confident enough to make the call right now that Djokovic is going to roll into Roland Garros 100%. I know he has turned it around in the past, but this time to me feels a little bit different just because of the physical ailment portion of it. And then among on-court dynamics, this is a court where Djokovic is not going to be able to rush Alcaraz nearly as much as he would on the other surfaces. He probably wouldn't be able to win as many free points with his serve. At this point in their careers, I would probably say Alcaraz also has the endurance advantage on Djokovic. 36-year-old Djokovic being the key there. And then it goes without saying that Alcaraz obviously has the form advantage throughout the course of this clay court season. I do think Djokovic will most probably be better in Paris, but I think that's a lot of checks in Alcaraz's column right now, given the circumstances, given form, etc., etc. So I'm going Alcaraz in a very tight 4. As for a potential Rune-Medvedev match, obviously we've seen them play 2 matches on the clay this year. In their earlier match in Monte Carlo, it was Medvedev, who was fatigued off a marathon late-night finish against Zverev the prior round. Rune got the win there. In Rome, it was Rune who had a couple of really physical matches in his lead-up to the final. And with how he played the final, with so many serve volleys, checking out of rallies really quickly, did look like that mileage got to his legs. And for Holger, in spite of his game being super well put together, I think that is an aspect in the cardio and endurance that should be pretty high in the list of priorities for him to improve. Even in these best of 3 tournaments, we've seen a lot of the time him get to the back end of these tournaments and gas out a little bit. You would think that's going to be exacerbated in the best of 5 format, and that's probably why it's going to be of the utmost importance that Rune manages his first week and lead up to a quarterfinal, potential semifinal as efficiently as possible, not getting caught up in some of these grindy extended matches when he doesn't need to, because otherwise that's probably going to have an impact in this hypothetical match, and I think that's a huge deciding factor here. Some of the issues that I mentioned with Sinner against Medvedev, I don't think Rune has those issues. He is pretty competent at net, uses the drop shot pretty well himself, but it's hard to see someone getting past Medvedev in this form without a remarkable physical exertion. That's what's going to be needed, and in that department, Medvedev has a massive edge. There's no way around it. And if we get the Daniil Medvedev that we've gotten all clay season, he's perfectly capable of spinning that web and taking away Rune's legs. Despite Holger having some of the tools to outmaneuver Daniil, that endurance edge really is the basis of this prediction. So I'll go with Medvedev here also in a tight 4. And that means Daniil Medvedev will be in the final. That's something I never thought I'd see myself saying. I'm honestly not even completely dug in it as I'm saying it, because, that Rome title was great, but I still feel like I could see either one of those Sinner and Rune matches down the road for him go either way. But I am a Medvedev believer, so I'm going to stick with it. I think this is legit. But against Alcaraz, there is nowhere to hide, and especially on clay, with Alcaraz's explosive power, combined with his elite touch, his elite fitness, his elite movement, I feel like Alcaraz would feel really good in this matchup on this court. We saw in a really slow hard court in Indian Wells that Daniil Medvedev looked lost out there, and Carlos does a lot of the things that unsettle Medvedev at a really high level. Obviously, the drop shot, he's the best I've ever seen at it. He can easily put that to good use against Daniil, who stands so far back, combined with the anticipation of Alcaraz banging down his huge ground strokes, Alcaraz being comfortable at net. It's hard to see a way through Alcaraz for Medvedev in a way that I so often say about opponents of Medvedev. So that being said, I'm obviously giving the edge to Alcaraz here. I'm gonna say Alcaraz over Medvedev in the final in 4. And so that wraps up this preview. That wraps up my predictions. This is how I think this tournament will unfold. A lot of people calling this a wide open tournament. Maybe in comparison to when you have a 14-time champ in the draw, sure. But at the end of the day, I could only really see like 3 or 4 guys feasibly lifting the trophy up in 2 Sundays. Nonetheless, as always, looks to be an interesting and exciting fortnight ahead of us. But that will do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed it, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like. Only takes a second, helps the video perform a lot better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.